November 4th, 1957. A gray Monday morning that smelled of burnt coffee and cigarette smoke. FBI counterintelligence officer James Donovan sat at his metal desk in the New York field office, flipping through surveillance reports that usually meant nothing. Page after page of parked cars, faces in crowds, routine movements around the Soviet UN mission. Then he stopped. A single line in a report from Agent McCarthy. Subject vehicle, 1955 Chevrolet Bel Air, New York plates HN 4782, observed illegally parked East 67th Street, 7:18 p.m. to 7:36 p.m., October 31st. Donovan recognized those plates. He'd seen them before. He pulled files from the past 6 months, spreading them across his desk like cards in a poker game. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Outside, taxi horns blared through Manhattan streets. His fingers moved faster, scanning dates and times, finding the pattern others had missed. Same car, same street. Always Thursday evenings. Always between 7 and 9. Always exactly 18 minutes. The vehicle belonged to Robert Grayson, an electrical engineer at Consolidated Electronics in White Plains. Defense contractor, security clearance, access to classified radar systems for military aircraft, the kind of work that interested Moscow. Donovan's pulse quickened. He cross-referenced Grayson's work schedule. The man claimed overtime every Thursday, but his actual time card showed departure at 5:45 p.m. 3 hours, unaccounted for. Enough time to drive to Manhattan, make a drop, return home to Scarsdale by 10. The parking tickets were paid promptly by mail. Never disputed. Most people fought tickets, argued, delayed payment. Grayson paid within days, as if eager to erase evidence of being there. Dear viewers, our big goal is to reach 1,000 subscribers on this channel, and with your support, we can achieve it. Only on our channel will you find such interesting and unique stories about the Cold War. Subscribe so you don't miss them. We are sincerely grateful to everyone who helps us achieve this goal. And now let's move on to today's story. Donovan knew how espionage really worked in 1957. It wasn't glamorous. It was patterns and patience, small mistakes accumulating like snow before an avalanche. Soviet agents were trained to be invisible, but invisibility required routine. Routine created patterns. Patterns could be detected. He picked up his phone and dialed the surveillance team supervisor. The receiver felt heavy against his ear. What he was about to request would commit significant resources to what might be nothing, or everything. But those parking tickets wouldn't let him go. 14 violations in 6 months. Same location, same duration, same prompt payment. An ordinary American would have changed his parking spot after the first ticket. Robert Grayson wasn't ordinary. Robert Grayson lived at 847 Woodland Avenue in Scarsdale, a 2-story colonial with white shutters and a lawn he mowed every Saturday. His neighbors knew him as the quiet engineer who waved from his driveway but rarely joined backyard barbecues. Polite, reserved, forgettable. Inside, the house smelled of Helen's pot roast and lemon furniture polish. Their son Michael collected baseball cards at the kitchen table. Their daughter Susan practiced piano scales in the living room, the notes climbing and falling with mechanical precision. Helen taught music lessons to neighborhood children every Tuesday and Friday, earning extra money for family vacations they never seemed to take. Robert kissed his wife goodbye each morning at 7:15. His lips brushing her cheek with practiced affection. He wore gray suits and carried a leather briefcase that never left his sight. The drive to Consolidated Electronics took 32 minutes in light traffic. He arrived by 8, departed by 6, except Thursdays when he stayed late for what he told Helen was mandatory overtime. She never questioned it. Why would she? Their Methodist church knew them as the family in the 4th pew, always present for Sunday services. Robert sang hymns in a soft baritone, held the hymnal for Helen, kept his children quiet during sermons. Pastor Williams considered him a model congregant, faithful, generous with the collection plate, never causing trouble. At work, Robert's colleagues saw a competent engineer who rarely spoke unless addressed. He solved problems with radar frequency modulation, improved signal clarity for fighter jets tracking Soviet bombers. His security clearance had been renewed in 1956 without incident. Background checks revealed nothing suspicious. Wisconsin orphan, raised by an aunt who died in 1949, self-made man who worked his way through engineering school on the GI Bill. We hope you have already subscribed to our channel, and if not, please do so right now. Our goal is to reach our first 1,000 subscribers. This is very important to us. Only on our channel will you find such interesting and unique stories about the Cold War. Subscribe so you don't miss them, and we'll get back to the story. Every detail of Robert Grayson's life formed a seamless narrative. Birth certificate from Madison, school records, military service, marriage license, all genuine documents recording a genuine American life. Except Robert Grayson had been born Andrei Volkov in Leningrad, 1919. Soviet intelligence had spent 3 years creating his legend, building a past from forged papers and planted memories. They'd inserted him into American society in 1951, given him 6 years to become invisible before activating him for intelligence work. The training had been meticulous. Accent elimination, cultural immersion, psychological conditioning to believe his own cover story. Andrei Volkov had been erased, replaced by Robert Grayson so completely that sometimes he forgot which man he'd been born as. But Thursday evenings at 7:18 p.m., parked illegally on East 67th Street, he remembered exactly who he was. Donovan spent 3 days buried in surveillance logs, his eyes burning from fluorescent light and cigarette smoke. He mapped every appearance of Grayson's Chevrolet near the Soviet mission, marking dates and times on a calendar with red ink. The pattern emerged like a photograph in developing fluid. January 10th, 7:21 p.m. January 17th, 7:18 p.m. January 24th, 7:23 p.m. Every Thursday, never missing a week. The precision suggested military discipline or something worse, intelligence tradecraft. He pulled Grayson's financial records next. Bank statements showed regular deposits matching his salary, modest withdrawals for household expenses, nothing unusual, no sudden wealth, no unexplained cash. The phone records revealed even less. Calls to his wife during lunch breaks, occasional conversations with colleagues about work projects, nothing to Helen's sister in Pennsylvania twice monthly. Dead end after dead end. But those parking tickets kept appearing in the file like accusations. Grayson paid each one within 4 days of receiving it. Money orders purchased at different post offices across Westchester County, never the same location twice, someone avoiding patterns while trapped in a larger one they couldn't see. Donovan requested neighborhood interviews. Agents knocked on doors along Woodland Avenue, asking casual questions about the Grayson family. Neighbors described a normal household. Maybe the husband worked too much. Maybe the wife seemed lonely. But nothing alarming. One neighbor mentioned Robert kept his garage locked always, even when home. Another noted he received mail from a Wisconsin veterans organization monthly. The Wisconsin detail bothered Donovan. He contacted the VA office in Madison requesting Grayson's service records. They arrived 6 days later in a manila envelope that smelled of dust and old paper. Everything checked out. Honorable discharge, combat service in Europe, medals for valor. Too perfect. Donovan flew to Madison on September 8th, interviewing the records clerk who'd processed Grayson's benefits claim in 1951. The clerk remembered nothing. Thousands of veterans had filed paperwork that year. But when Donovan asked to see the original documents, the clerk hesitated. Something in his expression shifted. The paperwork existed, but the file had been accessed only once after its creation, by Robert Grayson himself in 1951, immediately after submission. No audits, no reviews, no routine checks. Files that old should have been pulled dozens of times for various administrative reasons. This one had sat untouched for 6 years, as if someone wanted it forgotten. Back in New York, Donovan authorized physical surveillance starting September 12th. 4 agents in rotating shifts would follow Grayson from his morning departure until he returned home each night. Cameras would photograph everyone he contacted. His trash would be searched after collection. His mail would be photographed before delivery. The investment was massive for someone who might just be an engineer with bad parking habits. But Donovan's instincts, sharpened by 12 years of counterintelligence work, screamed that Robert Grayson was hiding something worth finding. October 17, 1957, 5:47 p.m. Agent Morrison watched through binoculars as Grayson emerged from Consolidated Electronics carrying his briefcase and a folded newspaper. The evening air had turned cold, leaves swirling across the parking lot in shades of copper and gold. Grayson climbed into his Chevrolet, started the engine, and pulled onto the highway toward home. Then he passed the Scarsdale exit. Morrison radioed the other surveillance cars. 3 vehicles maintained loose formation as Grayson continued south toward Manhattan. Traffic thickened near the city, red tail lights bleeding together in the dusk. Grayson drove with careful precision, never speeding, using turn signals, obeying every traffic law. At 7:18 p.m. he parked on East 67th Street. Illegally. Same spot as always. Morrison's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. Whatever Grayson had been doing for months was about to happen in real time, under FBI observation. 2 agents on foot moved into position, pretending to window shop at a nearby boutique. A 3rd agent sat in a parked sedan with a camera equipped with a telephoto lens. Grayson stepped from his car, tucking the newspaper under his arm. He wore his gray suit and carried nothing else. No briefcase, no packages, nothing obviously suspicious. Street lamps flickered on as he walked east, his breath forming small clouds in the October cold. The smell of roasted chestnuts drifted from a vendor's cart. 3 blocks later, Grayson entered a small park bordered by brownstone apartments. Bare trees cast skeletal shadows across the walkways. He sat on a wooden bench, unfolded his newspaper as if reading the evening headlines, then stood and walked away. The newspaper remained wedged between the bench slats. Morrison felt electricity shoot through his veins. A dead drop, the oldest tradecraft in espionage. Leave material in a predetermined location, let your contact retrieve it later. No direct meeting, no conversation, minimal risk of surveillance detection. 17 minutes passed. Morrison and his team waited, watching from different positions, cameras ready. A man in a dark overcoat approached the bench at 7:52 p.m. He sat, pretended to tie his shoe, and picked up the newspaper in a single fluid motion. The photographer's shutter clicked rapidly, capturing the man's face in sharp detail. Viktor Petrov, Soviet attaché to the United Nations, known intelligence officer operating under diplomatic cover. The FBI had been watching him for 2 years without catching him doing anything actionable, until now. Petrov walked north, disappeared into the subway at Lexington Avenue. Another team followed him back to the Soviet mission, where he entered through the heavily guarded front entrance. The newspaper went with him, presumably into a secure area where FBI surveillance couldn't penetrate. Morrison retrieved an identical newspaper from a trash receptacle near the bench. Inside the folded pages, he found nothing. Grayson had taken the original with him, leaving only the clean copy as camouflage. But they had photographs. They had the meeting. They had proof that Robert Grayson, American engineer with security clearance, was passing something to Soviet intelligence. Donovan stared at the surveillance photograph spread across his desk like evidence at a murder trial. Grayson's profile, sharp and clear, Petrov reaching for the newspaper, his diplomatic credentials meaningless now. The dead drop captured in sequential images that told a story no defense attorney could explain away. But one successful observation wasn't enough. Federal prosecutors would demand overwhelming evidence, multiple drops, documented patterns, physical proof of classified material changing hands. A single meeting could be explained as coincidence, however unlikely. Espionage convictions required certainty beyond any reasonable doubt. Donovan made a decision that would haunt him for years. They would watch Grayson complete another drop, but this time they would intercept the newspaper before Petrov retrieved it. They needed to see what secrets were being sold, needed evidence that would stand up in court and possibly send a man to the electric chair. October 24th, 1957. Thursday evening arrived with freezing rain that turned Manhattan streets into mirrors of reflected neon. Grayson left work at his usual time, the surveillance team trailing through weather that made their job harder. Windshield wipers beat rhythmically as they followed his Chevrolet through slick traffic. He parked at 7:19 p.m., 1 minute later than usual. The rain had intensified, drumming against car roofs and forming rivers along the curbs. Grayson walked with his newspaper held over his head like an umbrella, water soaking through his suit jacket. At the bench, he repeated the same sequence. Sit, unfold the paper, wedge it between the slats, walk away. His shoes splashed through puddles as he departed, leaving the newspaper exposed to the rain. Agent Morrison waited 3 minutes, then moved in. His hands shook as he extracted the newspaper, feeling its dampness, knowing what he might find inside. He carried it to a waiting car where another agent held a flashlight. The newspaper's interior pages had been hollowed out, creating a thin cavity. Inside, 4 strips of 35mm film, each containing dozens of photographed documents. Morrison held one strip up to the flashlight, squinting at the miniature images. Classified radar specifications, frequency modulation charts, Soviet aircraft detection ranges, everything stamped with security classifications ranging from confidential to top secret. Material that could help Moscow evade American air defenses, information that could cost American lives if war came. They photographed the film strips quickly, then returned the newspaper to the bench exactly as they'd found it. Petrov arrived 14 minutes later, collected his prize, and vanished into the rainy night, believing the operation had succeeded perfectly. But the FBI now possessed copies of everything Grayson had stolen. They knew the scope of his betrayal, the value of the intelligence he'd provided, the damage he'd inflicted on American national security. The next decision belonged to FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, and Donovan knew what it would be. Hoover had zero tolerance for espionage. He would want Grayson arrested immediately, publicly, with maximum media coverage to demonstrate FBI competence during an era of nuclear paranoia. Hoover's voice crackled through the telephone line on October 28th, sharp with the impatience that defined his 33 years running the bureau. He wanted Grayson in custody within 72 hours, wanted headlines proclaiming another Soviet spy caught by FBI vigilance, wanted proof that America's counterintelligence apparatus functioned flawlessly. Donovan argued for patience. Grayson might lead them to other agents, maybe an entire network operating across defense contractors. Premature arrest could leave a dozen spies in place, continuing their work while only one man faced justice. The phone went silent for 3 seconds. Then Hoover delivered his decision. Surveillance would continue for 5 more weeks, but not a day longer. December 3rd would be the arrest date, giving investigators time to identify additional contacts while minimizing further classified leaks. Grayson knew nothing of the countdown ticking toward his destruction. November passed in careful observation. He made 2 more drops, both intercepted and documented. The film contained specifications for the new F-106 Delta Dart interceptor, electronic warfare systems, and missile guidance updates. Each theft represented months of Soviet research bypassed, American advantages neutralized before they could be deployed. The FBI tracked everyone Grayson contacted. His colleagues at Consolidated Electronics were investigated quietly. None showed suspicious behavior. His neighbors remained oblivious. His pastor thought him slightly withdrawn lately, but attributed it to work stress. Helen Grayson noticed her husband seemed distracted during dinner, his mind elsewhere even when Susan played her piano recital pieces. She assumed he was worried about a project deadline. The truth? That he was calculating how many more document photographs he could produce before his next drop, never occurred to her. On November 21st, Thanksgiving, the Grayson family hosted Helen's sister and her husband. They ate turkey that Helen had brined for 2 days, the meat tender and fragrant with sage. Robert carved with steady hands, laughing at his brother-in-law's jokes about Eisenhower's golf obsession. FBI agents sat in a van 2 blocks away, recording the license plates of every visitor. Michael Grayson asked his father to throw football in the backyard after dinner. Robert declined, claiming his back hurt. The real reason, a Minox camera hidden in his study, needed to be prepared for Saturday's photography session. Consolidated Electronics would be closed for the holiday weekend, but Robert had taken documents home in his briefcase, concealed beneath legitimate work papers. December arrived with the first snow of winter. Grayson cleared his driveway on December 1st, the scrape of his shovel against concrete echoing through the pre-dawn darkness. He waved to his neighbor, Mr. Patterson, who was doing the same. 2 ordinary men performing an ordinary task, except one of them would be in federal custody within 48 hours. That evening, Donovan reviewed the arrest plan with his team. 12 agents would surround the house at 6:47 a.m. on December 3rd, timing chosen to catch Grayson before he left for work. The children would be present, unavoidable collateral damage in an operation that couldn't wait for a more convenient moment. December 3rd, 1957, 6:47 a.m. Frost covered the Grayson lawn like powdered sugar, each blade of grass crystallized in the pre-dawn cold. FBI vehicles rolled silently down Woodland Avenue, with headlights extinguished, exhaust creating ghostly plumes in the freezing air. Agents emerged wearing dark suits and carrying weapons they hoped not to use. Donovan approached the front door, his breath visible, his hand raised to knock. Behind him, 8 agents positioned themselves at windows and exits. 3 more waited at the property line, blocking any escape attempt. The street remained quiet except for a distant dog barking. He knocked 4 times. Helen answered in her blue bathrobe, hair uncombed, confusion spreading across her face as she registered the number of men on her porch. Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged. Behind her, footsteps descended the stairs. Robert appeared wearing pajamas and his reading glasses, one hand on the banister. His eyes met Donovan's, and something shifted in his expression. A microscopic change that revealed everything: recognition, calculation, acceptance. "Robert Grayson, you're under arrest for espionage against the United States of America." Helen's scream shattered the morning stillness. Upstairs, children began crying. Michael appeared at the top of the stairs in his flannel pajamas, his 9-year-old mind trying to process why strangers were invading his home. Susan clutched her stuffed rabbit, tears streaming down her face. Robert extended his wrists without protest. The handcuffs clicked shut with mechanical finality. He looked at his wife, his children, his home, the life he'd built from lies and tradecraft, and his face revealed nothing. The awkward engineer vanished, replaced by something colder and more disciplined. Agents moved through the house with rehearsed efficiency. They found the shortwave radio in Robert's study, hidden inside a hollowed dictionary placed prominently on the bookshelf. The Minox camera emerged from a shaving kit in the bathroom, small enough to conceal in a closed fist. Behind the heating vent in the basement, they discovered one-time cipher pads wrapped in waterproof plastic. In the garage, underneath Christmas decorations and garden tools, lay a metal box containing 2,400 photographed pages of classified documents, each image captured with precision, organized by subject matter, ready for transmission to Moscow. Years of systematic theft documented in miniature. Helen collapsed into a kitchen chair, hyperventilating. A female agent tried to calm her, explaining nothing, offering no comfort that could possibly address what was happening. The coffee pot on the counter continued percolating, filling the house with its ordinary aroma, while everything ordinary disintegrated. Robert was led to a waiting car, his neighbors beginning to emerge from their houses. Mr. Patterson stood on his porch in his bathrobe, watching. Mrs. Chen from across the street held her hand over her mouth. By noon, every resident of Woodland Avenue would know the quiet engineer had been arrested, though most wouldn't learn why for several days. As the car pulled away, Robert looked back once through the rear window. Helen stood in the doorway holding both children, her face white as the frost covering the lawn. He didn't wave, didn't mouth any final message, just turned forward and disappeared into federal custody. The interrogation room smelled of stale cigarettes and industrial cleaner. Robert sat in a metal chair bolted to the concrete floor, handcuffs chaining him to the table. Fluorescent tubes hummed overhead, their harsh light eliminating shadows and mercy alike. Donovan entered carrying a folder thick with evidence, photographs, documents, parking tickets that had started everything. 11 hours passed in silence. Robert stared at the wall, his face expressionless, his breathing steady. Donovan asked questions that evaporated unanswered into the stagnant air. Name, contacts, handler, training location, other agents. Each inquiry met with the same flat refusal to engage. At 9:17 p.m., a different agent brought coffee in styrofoam cups. Robert ignored his. The coffee grew cold, a skin forming on its surface like ice on a winter pond. Outside the windowless room, America continued its evening routines, families eating dinner, children doing homework, people living ordinary lives that didn't include betraying their country for ideological convictions. Day 2 began at 6 o'clock a.m. Fresh interrogators rotated in, employing different tactics. Aggressive questioning, sympathetic appeals, presentation of irrefutable evidence. Robert's silence remained absolute. A wall constructed from years of Soviet intelligence training that taught agents how to endure capture without breaking. Then, at 2:34 p.m. on December 4th, he spoke. "My real name is Andrei Volkov. I want to negotiate." His accent had changed subtly, vowels slightly flatter, consonants harder. The Wisconsin orphan had disappeared, revealing someone else underneath. Donovan leaned forward, sensing the crack forming in Volkov's carefully maintained cover. But the negotiation proved limited. Volkov offered technical details about Soviet intelligence methods, dead drop protocols, cipher systems, communication schedules. Information useful for counterintelligence, but carefully selected to avoid identifying other agents. He described his training facility outside Moscow, his insertion into American society, the psychological conditioning that transformed Andrei into Robert. He refused to name a single contact, refused to identify his handler beyond Viktor Petrov, refused to compromise the network he'd served for 6 years. Federal prosecutors arrived on December 6th with a simple proposition: full cooperation in exchange for life imprisonment. Continued silence would result in capital charges, a trial, and likely execution. The Rosenbergs had died in the electric chair 4 years earlier for less extensive espionage. Volkov's theft of classified radar specifications could justify the same punishment. He accepted life imprisonment without hesitation, calculating that protecting other agents was worth spending his remaining decades in a cell. Soviet intelligence would consider this honorable, the spy who refused to betray his comrades even when facing death. Helen visited on December 9th, accompanied by FBI agents who monitored every word. She sat across from her husband, or the man she'd believed was her husband, and searched his face for someone she recognized. He looked the same. Same gray eyes, same thin mouth, same hands that had held hers during their wedding vows. But he wasn't Robert Grayson. Had never been Robert Grayson. She asked only one question. "Did you ever love me?" Volkov stared at the table between them, remaining silent so long the agents thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he looked up, his eyes meeting hers with something that might have been regret, or might have been nothing. "I don't know anymore." March 1958 brought an early thaw to Manhattan, snow melting into gray slush that clogged storm drains and splashed against courthouse steps. Television trucks lined Foley Square, their cameras pointed at the federal building where United States v's Andrei Volkov would unfold before a jury of 12 ordinary citizens asked to judge extraordinary treason. The courtroom smelled of old wood and nervous sweat. Volkov entered wearing a plain suit provided by his court-appointed attorney, his hands cuffed until he reached the defense table. Spectators packed the gallery, journalists, FBI personnel, curious New Yorkers drawn by headlines screaming about Soviet infiltration of American defense industries. Helen sat in the third row, her sister gripping her hand. She'd lost 14 pounds since December, her face gaunt, her eyes hollowed by sleepless nights spent answering questions that had no satisfying answers. The children remained with Helen's parents in Pennsylvania, shielded from cameras and whispered accusations about their father's betrayal. Federal prosecutor Thomas Harriman opened with devastating simplicity. He displayed the parking tickets, each one projected onto a screen for the jury to see. 14 violations, same location, same pattern. Then came surveillance photographs. Volkov walking to the bench, leaving the newspaper. Petrov retrieving it. The dead drop captured in sequential images impossible to explain as anything but espionage. The film strips followed. Harriman held them up to courtroom lights, letting jurors see the miniature classified documents photographed with precision that required specialized equipment and training. An Air Force colonel testified about the radar specifications, explaining how this information could help Soviet bombers evade detection, could cost American lives in any future conflict. The evidence accumulated like snowfall, relentless, suffocating, inescapable. Volkov's defense attorney, Robert Kellerman, argued coercion. He claimed Soviet intelligence had threatened Volkov's family members still living in Leningrad, had forced cooperation through psychological manipulation and fear. A common defense in espionage cases, rarely successful, built more on desperation than evidence. Kellerman called no witnesses. Volkov refused to testify, exercising his Fifth Amendment rights, sitting motionless throughout the trial as his American life was dissected in excruciating detail. Prosecutors revealed that Robert Grayson's entire existence had been fabricated, birth certificate forged, school records planted, military service invented. Even his marriage license, legally valid, was built on fraudulent identity. Helen took the stand on March 18th, her voice barely audible as she answered questions about their 6-year marriage. Yes, he'd been a good husband. Yes, he'd seemed to love their children. No, she'd never suspected anything unusual. Tears streamed down her face as prosecutors displayed wedding photographs. The happy couple outside their Methodist church, Helen in white, Robert in a rented tuxedo, both smiling at a future that had been a lie from its inception. The jury deliberated 4 hours. They returned at 6:42 p.m., their faces grim with the weight of what they'd decided. Guilty on all counts. Judge Harold Medina scheduled sentencing for June 12th. Maximum penalty remained death by electrocution, though Volkov's limited cooperation offered possibility of life imprisonment. The courtroom emptied slowly. spectators filing past Volkov as marshals prepared to return him to his cell. He looked at Helen once more, his expression unreadable, before disappearing through the side door. June 12, 1958 arrived with oppressive humidity that made the courtroom feel smaller, the air thick enough to taste. Judge Medina entered precisely at 10 o'clock a.m., his black robes rustling as he took his seat. Volkov stood between two marshals, his face showing no emotion as he awaited judgment that would define the remainder of his life. Medina spoke for 11 minutes, his voice measured and deliberate. He acknowledged Volkov's limited cooperation, his refusal to name other agents, his acceptance of responsibility without excuses or fabrications. These factors prevented the death penalty. But the scope of his espionage, the years of systematic theft, the classified nature of stolen material, all demanded maximum punishment short of execution. 30 years in federal prison, no possibility of parole, no reduction for good behavior. 3 decades behind walls and wire, calculated to ensure Volkov would emerge, if he survived, as an old man with nothing remaining of the life he'd stolen. Volkov nodded once, accepting the sentence without visible reaction. He was 39 years old. He would be 69 upon release, assuming he lived that long. The Soviet Union he served might not even exist by then, a possibility that never occurred to anyone in that courtroom, but one that history would make devastatingly real. Helen filed for divorce 3 weeks later. The proceedings took 45 minutes, processed through a judge who specialized in uncontested dissolutions. She legally reclaimed her maiden name, Morrison, and petitioned to change Michael and Susan's surnames as well. The court approved immediately, understanding the necessity of erasing any connection to the spy who destroyed their family. August 1958. Helen moved with her children to Portland, Oregon, 3,000 miles from Scarsdale and its memories. Her sister's husband had business connections there, found her a small house near a good school district, helped her secure piano students who knew nothing about her past. She told Michael and Susan that their father had died in a car accident, creating a clean fiction to replace the complicated truth. Michael, now 10, didn't believe her. He'd seen the newspapers, heard whispered conversations, understood enough to know his father was alive somewhere in prison. But he accepted his mother's lie, recognizing her desperate need for it to be true. Susan, 7 years old, believed completely, her memories of Robert already fading into the unreliable haze of early childhood. Volkov began serving his sentence at USP Lewisburg in Pennsylvania, a maximum security facility housing the most dangerous federal prisoners. His cell measured 8 feet by 10, containing a metal bed, a toilet, a small desk bolted to the wall. The window offered a view of concrete exercise yards and razor wire glinting in sunlight. He shared a cell block with 3 other convicted Soviet spies, men whose operations had also been compromised through FBI counterintelligence. They played chess using handmade pieces, discussed literature and philosophy in Russian when guards weren't listening, and maintained absolute silence about their espionage work. Even in prison, operational security remained paramount. Years began passing in identical routine. Breakfast at 6:30 a.m., exercise yard at 10 o'clock, lunch at noon, more exercise at 3 o'clock, dinner at 6 o'clock, lights out at 10 o'clock. The days blurred together, distinguished only by seasons visible through barred windows, leaves turning color, snow falling, spring flowers blooming in areas prisoners could see but never touch. 19 years passed before anyone outside prison walls spoke Volkov's name again. The 1960s came and went. Kennedy's assassination, Vietnam, moon landings, social upheaval that transformed America while Volkov remained locked in unchanging routine. He turned 50, then 55, his hair graying, his body weakening from decades of institutional food and limited exercise. Then Cold War mathematics shifted in his favor. January 1977, 2 CIA officers were arrested in Moscow, caught photographing military installations near Leningrad. The KGB wanted them prosecuted publicly, used as propaganda against American imperialism, but the CIA wanted them back, preferably before interrogations extracted operational secrets that could compromise networks across Eastern Europe. Prisoner exchanges were rare but not unprecedented. The most famous had traded U-2 pilot Gary Powers for Soviet spy Rudolf Abel in 1962, a swap conducted on Berlin's Glienicke Bridge with cameras documenting the choreographed exchange. Now, 15 years later, diplomats began negotiating another trade. The Soviet list included 4 names, Andrei Volkov among them. All were aging spies serving lengthy sentences, no longer valuable for current intelligence but symbolically important to Moscow. The message was clear: serve the motherland, and the motherland eventually brings you home, even from American prisons. Volkov learned of his impending release on December 8, 1976. A federal marshal delivered the news in his cell, reading from an official document that outlined the exchange terms. Volkov would be transported to Vienna on January 14, 1977, where he would cross into Soviet custody in exchange for the CIA officers. He felt nothing. No joy, no relief, no anticipation. Prison had hollowed him out, leaving only mechanical routines and fading memories of the man he'd once pretended to be. The exchange occurred at Vienna International Airport in a secured hangar where press was forbidden. Volkov walked across 50 feet of concrete, his American prison uniform replaced by civilian clothes that hung loose on his diminished frame. Soviet officials greeted him with formal handshakes. No embrace, no emotional reunion. He was an asset being repatriated, not a hero receiving celebration. The flight to Moscow took 3 hours. Volkov stared through the window at clouds stretched across Eastern Europe, landscape transformed by 2 decades of development he'd missed entirely. The Soviet Union below was different from the one he'd left in 1951, more modern, more bureaucratic, more disillusioned with revolutionary ideals that had curdled into authoritarian routine. KGB officers met him at Sheremetyevo Airport, escorting him through diplomatic channels that bypassed normal customs. They drove him to a debriefing facility outside Moscow, where he spent 2 weeks explaining his American operation in exhaustive detail. Every dead drop, every stolen document, every lie he'd told Helen and his children. When debriefing concluded, they gave him a 2-room apartment in a concrete block near Izmailovo Park, a monthly pension equivalent to $180 American, and a medal for distinguished service that came with instructions never to wear it publicly. Soviet intelligence preferred its returned agents remain invisible, avoiding attention that might embarrass the state or provoke diplomatic incidents. Volkov was 58 years old, a stranger in his own country, possessing nothing but memories of lives he'd lived and destroyed. If you enjoyed this story, trust me, the next ones will be even more powerful. You're about to hear things no one else is telling. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss what's coming. If this video moved you, leave a like and drop a comment. And most importantly, share it with someone you care about. See you in the next video.